All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shaspreet, and today I'll be presenting our work on metal and metalloid extraction from JSC1A Simulant via carbothermal reduction. So I'll start my talk today by introducing the motivation and introducing the sample composition that was used in our work. This talk will have three main sections, with the first one being the thermodynamic analysis, followed by thermogravimetry coupled with solid-state surface material characterization, and finally the ultra-high vacuum experiments also with material characterization. I'll then summarize my talk with some conclusions. So as you may know, lunar ISRU is essential for space exploration advancements. So even though the lunar soil has been extensively studied as a source of oxygen, the regolith is also a valuable source for metal and metalloids, as they consist of different oxides. So these materials, such as silicon and iron, are especially useful for building infrastructures on the moon. And due to the lack of atmosphere, concentrated solar irradiation is a valuable heat source that can drive thermochemical reactions to reduce these oxides with high temperature capabilities. So one such pathway is the solar carbothermal reduction, which is the focus of this work. So this pathway requires carbon as a reductant with the benefit of reducing the reaction onset temperatures as compared to direct thermal heating. And it can be found on the moon in the form of methane or human waste upon colonization. So this work specifically focuses on this pathway in inert and ultra-high vacuum conditions to imitate lunar surface conditions to extract metal or metalloids. So highlighting some key compositions, the JSC1A major minerals are glass, plagioclase, and olivine. In oxide form, the JSC1A has high amounts of silicon and iron oxide readily available for extraction. The high amount of iron differentiates JSC1A from other simulants. So in our work, the simulant was mixed with activated carbon at about 0.3 mass ratio of carbon to simulant. This mass ratio represents the stoichiometric amount of carbon needed to completely reduce the simulant. So we conducted thermodynamic analysis in which we obtained equilibrium compositions for isobaric processes via Gibbs-free energy minimization. The HSC chemistry software package was used and the mixed sample compositions were the inputs. The temperature range studied was from 0 to 2000 degrees Celsius and at three different pressures, 0.1 bar, 10 to the negative 8 bar, and lunar surface pressure. So results show that constituents were predicted at lower temperatures with lower pressures following the Le Chatelier's principle. And in this case, silicon monoxide and silicon carbide was considered because they are stable intermediates in silicon production. So about 90% of conversion of silica to silicon gas was predicted at 10 to the negative 8 bar and lunar surface pressure. This means that complete conversion was not predicted within this temperature range. However, complete conversion of iron oxide to iron gas was predicted at 10 to the negative 8 bar and lunar surface pressure. Moving on to thermogravimetry, about 68 milligrams of sample was spread on an alumina crucible, and the experiment chamber was filled with 100 milliliters per minute of argon flow. The sample heating profile is shown in the plot in the black line. The sample was first heated to 500 Celsius for 2 hours to remove moisture, and then to 1500 Celsius before cooling down. The temporal gas evolution was measured using mass spectrometry and gas chromatography. As shown in the goal line, the sample lost about 50% of its mass, which coincided with CO evolution shown in the blue line. The temporal CO evolution showed that majority of these reactions were occurring at elevated temperatures. So looking at the mass balance, about 45% of mass loss was due to CO evolution, and about 55% is due to volatile leaving the sample. So this means that more than half of mass loss was due to volatile evolution. The TGA sample was then studied using SEM and EDS. So before TGA, the sample was homogeneous, with the magnesium scan showing concentrated spots throughout the sample. After TGA, some samples were loose and some sample formed circular-like melts on the crucible. And EDS showed that these melts consist of silicon, iron, and titanium compounds. The aluminum scan is contributed by the alumina crucible, and the silicon and magnesium scan showed that some samples were also directly sticking on the crucible. So the loose sample and the melted sample was then studied using XRD. The silicon carbide was detected in the loose sample and olivine was detected in the melted sample. This means that the olivine mineral, specifically Mg2SiO4, simply melted on the crucible and did not react. The loose sample was then studied using TEM and EDS. So TEM results show that the sample was crystal with an amorphous surface layer. And with EDS, we confirmed that the crystal is indeed silicon carbide, with the silicon scan and the carbon scan coinciding one another. EDS also showed that pure silicon and pure iron were formed, but in small quantities. So as you can see in the small sections of the silicon scan did not coincide with the carbon scan, and the iron scan did not coincide with either. And it's expected the amorphous layer was oxide layer as shown by the oxygen scan. So moving on to the ultra-high vacuum experiments, the ultra-high vacuum chamber was equipped with mass spectrometry. About 3 milligrams of sample was placed on a tantalum holder, and a copper foil was placed above the sample to collect volatiles leaving the sample during experiments. So 5 experiments were conducted consecutively, and the same sample was used to study which volatiles were leaving at which temperature. So in all experiments, the sample was first heated to 750 Celsius and then heated up in increments of 250 Celsius all the way up to its highest isotherm as shown in the table. The results for the final experiment is shown in the plot. So the key takeaway from these results is that CO evolved during all experiments at all isotherms indicating reaction, except at the 750 isotherm in the last 2 experiments due to completion of volatile evolution. So the copper foil that was used to collect the volatiles were then studied using ADS, and the weight percentage is shown in this chart. So the Cu, C, and O are contributions from the copper foil. Results show that iron, magnesium, and aluminum evolved from the sample at lower end of the temperature range, and silicon continuously evolved during the different temperatures. The changes in the amount of silicon evolving during the different experiments shows that different silicon constituents were evolving at different temperatures. So to recap, the thermodynamic analysis guided experiments for favorable reactions and operating conditions, and the TGA showed reactions with silicon, iron, and titanium compounds. And with material characterization, it's shown that crystalline silicon carbide, silicon, and iron were formed. With ultra-high vacuum experiments and subsequent material characterization, solid volatile depositions were identified at varying temperatures. To conclude, this work deepened the understanding of the carbothermal pathway of reducing lunar regolith to valuable metal and metalloids in ultra-high vacuum and inert conditions. This work was done as part of the ISRU project, which is directly sponsored by Georgia Tech Research Institute. I'd also like to thank my research team at Solar FTL and EPICS Lab at Georgia Tech. Thank you for listening, and I will now take questions.
Okay. Yep. I have time for questions.
Thanks. Yeah, Carl Hibisian APL. So I work in the ISRU focus group, part of LSI, and the carbothermal reduction is one of the primary techniques that NASA is funding and exploring for, as some people here know, for extracting oxygen. This is the first I've seen of carbothermal producing metals as well, which was one of the advantages of MRE. So the question then really is, under pressure, because we'll be interested in a lot of extraction, very fast extraction, not under UHV conditions, because that's not very quick. But we're looking at kilograms per day is what we want to extract from the surface. So that would imply probably working under some significant pressure. How does that affect your results? Higher pressure, and what are the odds, or what are the possibility of being able to actually accumulate those metals that are evolved along with oxygen?
Let me repeat your question. Are you trying to ask that usually we're expecting in small amounts of evolution, and how is that scaled in a larger scale?
Yeah, I'm asking about scaling it up, I suppose. Yes.
Yeah. So that has to be done, but these experiments were done in small lab scale, right? But we are planning like experiments in which we are using like more bulk of sample to see how much of yield we can, like how much yield of metals can we produce. Like in this case, we were only able to show that, like small quantities of iron or silicon were produced, even though the majority was silicon carbide. But yeah, we do like to run like more experiments with bulk
Sure.
samples.
Sure. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Then when you do more experiments, recommend using an orthosite or a Highland simulant. That's more relevant to the Artemis mission. But no, very nice work. Thank you.
Thank you.